She opened the door with a ledger in her hand and looked at him like she was deciding whether he was worth the trouble. "I don't need a cowboy," she said. "I need a husband." He almost laughed. Then he realized she wasn't joking. Nathaniel Cole had knocked on more doors than he could count. 28 years old, and not one of those doors had ever led to something that was actually his. He worked other men's ranches, slept in other men's barns, fixed fences that would never carry his name. He told himself it was freedom. Most nights it just felt like never arriving anywhere. He'd ridden 3 days from the railhead chasing a rumor, a short-handed cattle operation outside a town called Fort Meridian. The directions were bad, like they always were. Follow the creek, look for the red barn. But the barn was there, and the house beside it looked cared for in a way that told him someone was fighting hard to keep it standing. He tied off his horse and knocked. The woman who answered wasn't what he expected. 26, dark-haired, eyes that sized up the whole situation before she said a word. She held that ledger like it was part of her body. He took his hat off, gave her his pitch, cattle experience, hard worker, the usual. She cut him off before he finished. "I don't need a hand," she said. "I need a husband." Flat. Not cruel. Just a fact she'd already done the math on. He stood there with his speech falling apart in his mouth. Then she turned and walked back inside, still holding the ledger, and said, "Come in. I'll explain." He followed her. "What else do you do?" Her name was Clara Whitfield. Her husband Thomas had died 8 months earlier, a fever, fast and final. He'd left her 300 acres, a growing herd, 2 horses, and $420 owed to the Fort Meridian Bank. Thomas had borrowed it the spring before, betting cattle prices would climb. They hadn't climbed fast enough. Under the law back then, a widow wasn't just grieving. She was stuck. The estate was tied up in probate, and the bank had every right to call in that loan rather than extend it to a woman with no husband's signature on the paper. 60 days, and the note came due. Clara laid it all out at her kitchen table, calm and precise, like she'd already run these numbers 100 times. Sell enough cattle to cover the debt, and she'd have nothing to survive the winter. No family to borrow from. A lawyer in town had already told her a court fight was a losing bet. She closed the ledger. "The law only asks for one thing," she said. "A husband's signature. That's all I need from you." "You're describing a business deal," he said. "I'm describing a marriage that starts as one," she answered. "A home. $40 a month once the refinance goes through. A share of the operation. In exchange, your name on the papers, and your work on this land like it actually matters to you." "You don't know a thing about me." "No," she said. "But I know 3 things. You came here looking for honest work. You took your hat off when I opened the door. And you didn't laugh when I told you the situation." She held his eyes. "That's more than the last 2 men managed." There had been others. One laughed in her face. One tried to twist the terms into something she wouldn't accept. She told him he had until morning, pointed him to a clean barn, and went back to her ledger like the conversation was already finished. He sat at that table a long time before he left the room. Later, lying in the hay, he noticed something across the east pasture, a rider, still as a fence post, watching the house. The man turned and rode off before Nathaniel got a good look. He filed it away and tried to sleep. The animals told him something too. A neglected place shows it in the herd first, thin, jumpy, poorly kept. These weren't. Whatever Clara was struggling with, it wasn't a lack of care. It was a lack of options. He came to the kitchen at 6 the next morning. Coffee already made, bacon in the pan, the ledger open again. She looked up. "Yes," he said. Something shifted in her face, not relief exactly, more like the exhale of someone who'd been carrying something heavy alone and just felt a second pair of hands take some of the weight. They married that Wednesday, 11 minutes, a preacher and 2 witnesses. Walking back to the wagon, she thanked him. He told her they should go over the cattle records that night. He wanted to know what they were working with before the week was out. She gave him a sideways look. "All right," she said, and something close to a smile crossed her face. It didn't quite land. But it was there. On that same ride, a man named Silas Renner stood outside the feed store, watching their wagon pass with the stillness of someone who just learned something and was already deciding what to do with it. Renner owned 500 acres to the east. He'd made 2 offers on Clara's land, both refused. When she remarried, he didn't say a word publicly. He just went quiet, the kind of quiet that means a man has switched strategies, not given up. The first weeks were pure work. Fences, cattle, a barn roof sagging on one side. Nathaniel asked questions like a man trying to understand a system, not impress someone. Clara answered like a woman who'd explained this land to herself every day for 8 months just to keep going. The first time he drove a nail into that barn roof as her husband, he stopped and listened to the sound. It hit different. He didn't say anything. He just went back to work. At the bank Thursday, the banker fired 3 quick questions about the property, never once looking at Clara. Nathaniel answered every one from memory. The banker signed the refinance. Walking out, Clara said, "He looked at you like you'd done something impressive." "What did I do?" "You answered without checking with me first. You read the whole ledger." "I needed to understand what I was working with," he said. She studied him a second longer than usual, then kept walking. "The cattle records are in the second drawer," she said. "I'll show you the pasture rotation after supper." What he didn't tell her yet was what he'd found buried in that ledger, a note in Thomas's handwriting from the spring before. A mention of Renner's offer. A mention of a boundary discrepancy on the old 1874 survey. A reminder to check it before winter. Thomas never had. Nathaniel folded that worry away and kept it to himself. Renner rode up to the east fence one Monday while Nathaniel worked. "You're the new husband," he said. Nathaniel Cole. Heard Clara finally found someone to sign the papers. "She found a husband," Nathaniel said. The papers were a side effect. Renner looked at the fence, lit a cigar. "That land's been argued over longer than most folks know," he said, slow, like he was measuring the water. "Old surveys got irregularities. Bank knows it too. Might want to check that before you sink more work into the east pasture." He rode off without waiting for an answer. Nathaniel drove the next post in with 3 hard strikes and stood there a long while, staring east. That night he wrote a letter to a surveyor 2 counties over, a man named Elias Vance. October came, and the arrangement started growing past its 4 original terms without either of them announcing it. One evening in the barn, Clara brought him a supper plate, not part of any deal, just something that had started happening. She watched him mend a cracked harness. He was a good man, she said of Thomas. Just wasn't careful with money. Or ledgers. Or land filings. The note about the survey, Nathaniel said. I've been looking into it. She went still. You found that in October. I didn't want to hand you a problem before I understood what I was actually handing you. She sat down on the workbench and looked at him differently than she had before. This wasn't the useful stranger hired to sign papers. This was a man who'd found trouble in her dead husband's ledger and sat on it for 3 weeks so he could bring her a plan alongside the fear, not just the fear alone. What's the shape of it? She asked. Renner's known about the error for years. Waiting for the right moment to use it. The right moment was always going to be when you looked vulnerable enough. He set the harness down. I already wrote to a surveyor. If it's real, we get it corrected and filed before he can move. She was quiet a long moment. You've been carrying this since the fence line. Since the fence line. Something shifted in her face, the look of a woman who's managed everything alone for so long that being looked after, quietly, without asking for credit, lands somewhere she wasn't ready for. She set her plate beside his on the workbench, and they ate supper in that barn without another word. The surveyor arrived in mid-November and spent 2 days on the east pasture, Nathaniel working beside him the whole time, learning, not directing. The result confirmed it. The 1874 survey had shifted the eastern boundary 90 feet too far west. 40 acres Renner had circled for years belonged, by correct measurement, entirely to Clara. They filed the corrected survey Thursday. Friday night, someone cut the east fence. Not one section, 3. A quarter mile of wire down, posts pulled, 60 head pushed into the open land between the two properties. Nathaniel found it at 5 in the morning. He came back, saddled his horse, stood at the barn door 30 seconds in the freezing dark. Then he went inside and woke her. East fence is down. 3 sections. Cattle are out. She was up and dressed before he finished the sentence. Boots on, rifle off the hook, out to the barn without a word. You don't have to come, he said. They're my cattle, she said, already saddling her horse. They rode out together into the dark. They found the herd spread across a mile of open ground, moved on purpose by riders who knew exactly what they were doing. Tracks led east, straight toward Renner's boundary, timed perfectly to tangle up the fresh survey in a legal mess before it was even 2 days old. While Clara worked alone cutting off strays, Nathaniel pushed further out and found 2 of Renner's men sitting their horses, watching the herd drift, waiting. He rode straight at them. No weapon raised. Just a man on a horse, moving toward 2 others in the freezing wind, with the calm of someone who already knows exactly how far he's willing to go. This ain't your land, friend, one of them said. Actually, it is, Nathaniel said. Filed Thursday. Go check if you don't believe me. He held the man's stare. I'm taking my cattle home. You can help, or you can ride back and tell Renner the survey's filed and the herd's already home. And if anybody cuts my fence again in the dark, I won't be out here alone next time. Silence. The wind picked up. Then both men turned and rode east without a word. Nathaniel sat there until they were gone, then rode back to help Clara finish. By the time the fence was patched, the temperature had dropped 15 degrees, and the first snow was already falling sideways. Big storm coming, Clara said, looking at the sky. I know. Then we've got work to do. She was already riding for the barn. What followed was a winter people out there still talk about. 20 below. Creeks frozen solid. Windmills seized and had to be freed by hand in cold that could burn skin in minutes. They worked like sleep was optional. They lost 7 cattle in the first week, losses nobody could have stopped. They saved 11 more by bringing them into the barn, even the kitchen, including 3 calves wrapped in blankets by the stove for 2 straight days while Clara and Nathaniel traded shifts keeping them warm. On the worst night, 22 below, wind screaming sideways hard enough it took 2 people to force the barn door shut, Nathaniel came in from the north pasture near midnight with frostbite starting in 3 fingers. Clara sat him at the table and worked on his hands for 20 minutes straight, calm, steady, giving him nothing but practical instructions. When the color came back into his fingers, he looked at her bent over his hands in the lamplight. Clara, he said. She looked up. Thank you, he said. She held his eyes a moment. They're your hands too, she said. This is your land too. Then she went back to his fingers like the conversation was finished, even though something had clearly just started. Renner came back in February, once the worst had broken. He found Nathaniel mending that same east fence, rebuilt stronger now, posts set deeper, wire pulled tighter. Renner studied it a long while. "Lost about 30 head in the storm," he said. "We lost 22, Nathaniel said, not stopping his work. "Heard you came through better than most." "We worked harder than most." "My men that night," Renner started. "Were doing what you told them," Nathaniel said. "Or what you let them do." "Same thing." "The survey stands," Renner said. "It does." "Then there's nothing left to say about the east pasture." Nathaniel set his tools down and looked him square in the eye. "One thing," he said. "Clara Whitfield has lived on this land her whole adult life. Buried her husband on it. Held on to it through a bank that wanted it, a winter that tried to kill it, and neighbors who figured a woman alone was easy pickings." He picked the tools back up. "She's not alone anymore. I want us clear on that." Renner studied him a long moment, the kind of look that takes a man's full measure, then gave a single nod, the nod of someone deciding to be a neighbor instead of a problem, because he'd finally been given a real reason to. He rode east without another word. Spring came in strong that year, the kind of grass that only follows a hard winter. Nathaniel and Clara walked the east fence line together after the thaw, checking every section, and he looked at that land the way he'd been looking at it since August, like something that was his to understand and his to keep. He wrote his father a letter that April, the first in 3 years. It said simply, "I found a place. I'm staying." Clara found it on the table before he mailed it and read every word. He knew, because she read everything, and she never said a thing about it, which, with her, was its own way of saying everything. The herd kept growing. 53 head became 58 by May with the spring calves. The operation was turning an honest, modest profit, nothing like the expansion Thomas had gambled on, but real, and built on ground that had already been tested. The banker stopped Nathaniel on the street that April and told him the Whitfield Cole account had become the most reliable note in his whole portfolio. He said it with the surprise of a man revising an opinion he hadn't expected to change. One May morning, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the ledger and slid it across to him without a word when he came in. The salary line, $40 a month, 5 months, $200, and beside every entry, in her careful hand, returned to operation. He looked up. She was already watching him. "You've been paying yourself right back into the ranch," she said. "The operation needed it." "So did I." A pause. "You could have left," she said. "After Renner, after the storm. You had every reason." He looked down at that careful column of numbers, at everything they'd built and everything it had cost. "No," he said. "I didn't." She held his eyes a long moment, then closed the ledger. Outside, the Colorado spring held that land like it belonged to both of them completely, because now it did. The east fence stood strong. The herd was growing. And by every measure Clara Whitfield had ever used, it was, without question, exactly right. She had opened the door with a ledger in her hand, after being turned away twice already, and asked anyway. He had spent his whole life driving nails into other men's barns without ever once hearing the sound come back different, until the day he followed a stranger into her kitchen and said yes to the strangest offer of his life.